When thinking about lost media, you generally assume that eventually, with enough time and effort, the piece of lost media that people are looking for will eventually be found. While in most cases this is the case, there are some pieces of lost media that will just never be found, no matter how hard we look or how much time we dedicate into finding it. Here are 10 of the more interesting pieces of lost media that are lost forever. Thomas the Tank Engine is a popular children's book series and has had some sort of television show running since 1984. But some 30 years before, in 1953, there was an attempt to make a Thomas the Tank Engine television show. In the summer of 1953, the BBC approached the creator of Thomas the Tank Engine, Reverend Wilbert Awdry, in the hopes of creating a live-action adaptation. Reverend Awdry agreed on the condition that the show be as faithful to the book series as possible. With the green light to go ahead, the BBC decided to adapt the third story in the first book, called The Sad Story of Henry, into a 10-minute time slot. In The Sad Story of Henry, the character of Henry gets a fresh coat of paint, and, not wanting his new paint to be ruined in the rain, refuses to leave a tunnel. After many attempts to get Henry to move by Thomas and the other trains, the tunnel is bricked up, with Henry still refusing to leave, and a new track is put around the tunnel. By the end of the short, Henry runs out of steam and is unable to communicate, and wonders if he will ever be in service again. After a rushed production of about a month, and with the model trains not even being ready until a few days before their scheduled broadcast, the 10-minute program aired on Sunday, June 14th, 1953. The broadcast initially started off well, with the only minor gripe being that the train model movement was stiff and jerky. That is, until, somewhere in the broadcast, one of the model trains derailed and a human hand was seen picking up the train and putting it back on the tracks. It was also said that the narrator struggled to improvise around the mistake. After the disastrous premiere, Reverend Awdry demanded that the second broadcast, scheduled for June 28th, proceed without any complications, but thanks to public outcry, all future plans for a televised Thomas the Tank Engine show were cancelled. There are several reasons why this short will remain lost. For one, the broadcast was done live, and at a time when recording live events at home simply didn't exist yet. Even if the BBC did somehow record the show with some early recording device, due to the unpopularity of the short, it would have more than likely been wiped to reuse the film reel. The BBC was notorious for wiping and reusing old film reels all the way up until the late 1970s. Batman Fights Dracula is a very obscure Filipino comedy film made in 1967 and is known in the lost media community as the holy grail of lost Asian cinema. Almost nothing is known about the film, other than the cast and the plot of the film that involves a mad scientist named Dr. Zorba finding a way to resurrect Dracula. In the film, Dr. Zorba controls Dracula and makes him impervious to the traditional ways of killing a vampire. Eventually, Dr. Zorba is tracked down and is killed by somehow turning Dracula against him. Needless to say, this plot for the movie is bizarre, to say the least. But that is because it was actually an unlicensed film, meaning that several characters had to be changed, like Batman's sidekick Robin becoming Reuben. After its release, it quietly faded into obscurity, and all that remained of the film was the original poster. But after the search for the film began in the 2010s, several other pictures were uncovered from a Filipino newspaper covering the film at the time. Unfortunately, due to the fact that the film is close to 60 years old, was made without permission, and was made at a time when the Filipino film industry was in its infancy, the chances of finding this film are slim to none. Everybody knows the box office hit Titanic, starring Leonardo DiCaprio as Jack and Kate Winslet as Rose. You might even know 1958's A Night to Remember, depicting the tragedy of the Titanic. But what if I told you a film came out mere weeks after the tragedy and had real survivors acting in the film that even wore the same clothes they did the night of the actual sinking? Enter Saved from the Titanic, released on Tuesday, May 14th, 1912, just 29 days after the sinking of the Titanic. Upon arriving in New York on the Carpathia, actress Dorothy Gibson, who was just 22 at the time, wrote a script about her experiences aboard the Titanic. At the time, Gibson was a rising star, making the transition from modeling for postcards and magazines to silent films. The film itself is only about 10 minutes long, and was filmed in less than a week. Not only is this lost film notable for being the first Titanic film, but it also used an experimental coloring process called kinemacolor, making it one of the earliest examples of a color film. The film did exceptionally well, with the influential review journal saying in part, "Miss Gibson had hardly recovered from her terrible strain in the wreck when she was called upon to take part in this new piece, which she constructed as well. It was a nerve-wracking task, but like actresses before the footlights, this beautiful young cinematic star valiantly conquered her own feelings and went through the work. A surprising and artistically perfect reel has resulted." Though others criticized her for trying to make money off a recent event, the New York Dramatic Mirror condemned the film, saying, "The bare idea of undertaking to reproduce in a studio, no matter how well equipped, or by reenacted sea scenes, an event of the appalling character of the Titanic disaster, with its 1,600 victims, is revolting, especially at this time when the horrors of the event are so fresh in mind, and that a young woman, who came so lately with her good mother safely through this distressing scenes, can now bring herself to commercialize her good fortune, and by grace of God, is past understanding." Unfortunately, the only known reels of Saved from the Titanic were destroyed by a fire at the Eclair studio in March 1914. And as for Dorothy Gibson herself, the experience of surviving the Titanic took its toll on her mental health. Soon after completing the film, she suffered a mental breakdown and never acted again. She died at the age of 56 of a stroke in 1946. If you grew up in the 2000s, you might have heard of a stop-motion children's television show called Sha the Sheep. This show is very popular in the UK, and is actually a spin-off of the also popular Wallace and Gromit shorts and films. Sha the Sheep first appeared in the 1995 Wallace and Gromit short, A Close Shave, and soon became a fan favorite. Wanting to capitalize on the popularity of the character, a pilot was made sometime in the early 2000s, with a full series airing in 2007, and still going on to this day. Little is known about the pilot, except that it was noticeably lower budget than the final series, with smaller and less defined sets. The pilot made was never meant to have any sort of release, and was only made as a test to get the green light for a full series. But, you must be asking yourselves, test pilots are found all the time. Just look at the Johnny Quasar pilot that would become Jimmy Neutron, found in 2017, or the original Bluey test pilot, found just last year in 2023. Well, in 2005, a fire broke out in a storage warehouse containing a lot of the props and sets used for the Sha the Sheep pilot. Fortunately, the master tapes were stored elsewhere, so presumably, the short still exists, but there has been no word on if the producers still have the pilot, or if it will ever be released. This next piece of lost media is similar to the previous entry, as it has to do with an animated children's television cartoon from the 2000s. The Backyardigans follows the escapades of Uniqua, Pablo, Tyrone, Tasha, and Austin, as they use their imagination to go on fantastical adventures. Typically, each episode has a different setting, and highlights a different genre of music. Before the show debuted in 2004, series creator and producer Janice Burgress had the opportunity to produce a test pilot for the show in 1995. The pilot was quite different from the final show. For instance, it wasn't even called The Backyardigans. It was called Me and My Friends, was live action instead of animated, and one of the characters, Austin the Purple Kangaroo, was absent. Me and My Friends would ultimately be rejected in favor of another test pilot being filmed around the same time, called Dora the Explorer. A clip of the pilot was released as a part of a 5-minute compilation video for Nickelodeon Studios' 10-year anniversary. The clip in question is only about 3 seconds long, and was dubbed over for the compilation. After the 3-second clip was released, there wasn't a lot of new material that was found. That is until recently, in 2022, YouTuber Burr Lost Media found several more photos from the production of the pilot that were given to him by the character designer. Even more recently, in March of this year, that same character designer posted some concept art for the pilot on social media. This pilot admittedly has the best chance to one day be found and see the light of day, but as of writing this script, it has yet to be found. Everybody knows the iconic show SpongeBob. It has a long history that goes back 25 years, starting in 1999. In 2001, the episode titled Sailor Mouth aired. The episode has SpongeBob and Patrick adding sentence enhancers to their sentences, which are interpreted to be swear words that are censored with dolphin sounds, among other things. But according to SpongeBob's voice actor, Tom Kenny, there exists an uncensored version of the episode. Kenny has said that they were told to use nonsense words when recording the episode, but found it too difficult, so they asked Nickelodeon if they could actually swear, and they agreed.
Just for a moment, this is a bit of information about our one of our episodes.
I think this whole panel's been a digression.
There was an episode called Sailor Mouth, where whenever people cussed, they would dub in porpoise sounds and whatever things to sound. Then at the end, Clancy, Mr. Krabs, when he stubbed his toe and he goes off on a cussing binge, just remember the next time you see it, he was really cussing when we recorded the episode. I learned a lot of new words that day.
Yes, that's true, because I remember that recording session, and Steve, you know, like Clancy was going, "Ooh, rackin', frackin', rickin', jucko, rackin', chicka," and Steve's like, "It's not quite fluent. Just swear. Just swear. Just say the most horrible epithets that you can think of. Just let them out,
did.
And we'll beep it. It's going to be beeped."
He has also said that the uncensored audio is buried in the deepest parts of Nickelodeon archives, and that it will never see the light of day. Many people have tried to make recreations of the episode, using audio of the voice actors swearing and splicing it together into the show. But the authentic original recording will probably be buried forever. One of the greatest achievements of the 20th century was the Apollo missions of the 1960s, culminating on July 20th, 1969, when Apollo 11 touched down on the surface of the moon and Neil Armstrong said those now infamous words. It's estimated that 150 million Americans tuned in to watch this moment in history. The pictures the public were seeing in their homes was thanks to the fact that a high-quality 16mm film Super 8 camera was brought along for scientific purposes and to document this momentous occasion. The signal from the television camera was transmitted live from the moon back to Earth via a system known as slow scan television, or SSTV. SSTV allowed the live broadcast to be turned into a radio signal and picked up by several telescopes on Earth. This method was great because the image was still very clear, comparable in quality to modern HD video, but there was a major problem. Most television stations at the time did not have the capabilities to display the experimental SSTV. So to make the live picture compatible with the television stations, NASA, with all their cutting-edge technology and money, decided to simply point a regular television camera at the incoming high-quality signal. This remedied the problem of being non-compatible for television stations, but also had the effect of significantly lowering the quality of the live broadcast. NASA literally just recorded the screen of one of the most important events in human history. As for the actual film that was shot on the moon, that, like so many other reels of film at the time, was wiped and reused to save money. To make matters even worse, the Apollo 11 mission was the only moon landing footage that needed to be converted to be played on television. Apollo missions 12 through 17 were just recorded in a signal that was compatible for television. And as a result, we have high-quality footage from those missions, but the original Apollo 11 high-quality broadcast will, unfortunately, remain lost forever. The Watergate affair was one of the biggest scandals to come out of the 1970s. This particular piece of lost media is so multifaceted that I could make an entire video on it, and very well may in the future. But to put it in the most simplest of terms, in the summer of 1972, 5 burglars were caught by police snooping around the Democratic National Committee's office at the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. After an investigation, it was found that the burglars were connected to then-President Richard Nixon, who was running for re-election. It was also found that Nixon attempted to cover up his involvement. As a result of these findings, the U.S. Congress ordered Nixon to record all telephone calls and conversations while an impeachment trial was underway. The person in charge of reviewing and transcribing Nixon's recordings was the president's personal secretary, Rosemary Woods. On September 29, 1973, Woods was reviewing a tape from June 20, 1972, when she made what she called a terrible mistake. While playing the tape and transcribing what the president said, Woods received a telephone call, and as she reached for the stop button on the reel-to-reel tape recorder, she accidentally hit the record button. For the duration of the call, the tape was re-recorded, but the call only lasted approximately 5 minutes, and Woods claimed she didn't know how the gap had grown to 18.5 minutes. To make matters even more suspicious, the gap begins just as Nixon and White House Chief of Staff Bob Haldeman were discussing Watergate. To this day, over 50 years later, no one knows just what exactly was said during those 18.5 minutes. If you'd like to see me do a more in-depth analysis of the Watergate conspiracy, feel free to comment down below, and make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps me out and shows me you want to see more. Turning to the more risque side of lost media, there is the Mickey and Minnie Mouse adult animated short. Not only is this short lost, but most can't even agree if the short even existed in the first place. The story goes that in 1936, Walt Disney's brother, Roy Disney, encouraged Disney's employees to throw Walt a surprise party for his 35th birthday. Supposedly, 2 unknown animators thought it would be funny if they were to animate a very explicit adult-themed short about Mickey and Minnie for the party. As the short was being shown, Disney laughed, complimented the quality of the animation, and asked who had created the short. Once the 2 animators came forward, he promptly fired them and left the building. It has been said that he ordered all copies of the short to be destroyed, and never spoke of it again. Many have questioned if the short really ever even existed. The first ever public mention of anything even related to a Mickey and Minnie Mouse adult short was in 1979 by Harland Ellison. Allegedly, he claimed that he worked for Disney for a single day, and that while at lunch, made a joke involving Disney characters in adult situations, unaware that Roy Disney and several other company executives were sitting right behind him. When Ellison returned to his desk after lunch, he was notified that he was fired. It is unknown if this short actually exists, or if it was merely a story that was blown out of proportion and exaggerated as a way to generate controversy. Finally, we have the last piece of lost media on this list. Freaks is a 1932 horror movie produced by Todd Browning that centered around a group of circus performers. It's also worth noting that Browning also made the silent film London After Midnight, which is considered to be one of the most sought-after pieces of lost media in the lost media community. The film was and still is controversial for its use of real carnival sideshow performers with real mental and physical deformities. When the film was being screened by test audiences, the feedback was extremely negative. The reception was so bad that one of the test audiences, quote, threatened to sue MGM for giving her a miscarriage. After the disastrous test screening, the film was significantly altered. According to test audience that saw the original version, some of the cuts included many cuts revolving around the relationship of the characters Venus and Faroso, many cuts to the growing hatred between Venus and Hercules, and, perhaps most shocking, a completely different ending, which was much darker and shocking, involving a chase scene where all of the freaks chase down and brutally murder Hercules. After these changes, the film did somewhat better, but for 30 years after the film's release, it was banned in the UK and Canada. In the decades since the movie's release, the movie's reputation has improved a bit, with some saying that the portrayal of the freaks were shown in a way which saw them overcoming their disabilities and making a name for themselves at a time when people such as them were completely looked down upon. As for the producer, Todd Browning, the film ruined his reputation in Hollywood, and he struggled to find steady work in the midst of the Depression. Today, the film Freaks, while still controversial, is available today, but the original, much darker version has been lost to time. We just looked at 10 of what I believe to be the most interesting cases of lost media that will never be found. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you like my content, please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss when I upload again. I hope you all have a great day. I'll see you guys in the next one.